What if the first catastrophe wasn't an accident, but a choice? Picture this. A darkened sky, thick with smoke that rolls across continents. The air hums with a heat that is not from the sun but from 10,000 fires burning in careful patterns across the land. The flames are not wild. They move with intention, carving paths through ancient forests, releasing carbon into an atmosphere that has not felt such warmth in millennia. And somewhere in the dance of ash and ember, a question rises like the smoke itself. What if this wasn't destruction, but creation? What if our ancestors didn't just survive their world, but deliberately, methodically, remade it? Before we go further into this unsettling history, if you're drawn to the kind of stories that rest between science and mystery, that challenge what we think we know about our deepest past, consider subscribing. This is a journey we take together, into the spaces where accepted history begins to crack. And tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. Are you in a city built on ancient ground? Are you surrounded by forests that remember fire? We are taught a comfortable narrative. That humans emerged slowly from the wilderness, that we learned to farm, to build, to shape our environment in gentle increments. That our mastery over nature came gradually, carefully, one invention at a time. We imagine our Stone Age ancestors as passive recipients of their world, adapting to ice ages and warming periods, migrating with the herds, following the rhythms that nature dictated. But what if that story is incomplete? What if, tens of thousands of years before the first seed was planted in Mesopotamian soil, before the first city rose in Sumer, before bronze or iron or writing, humans were already conducting the largest environmental engineering project in Earth's history? In the 1960s, archaeologists working in southern Africa made a discovery that seemed unremarkable at first. Fire pits, charcoal deposits, the remnants of ancient campfires, preserved in layers of sediment, standard fare for understanding how early humans lived. But as the dating techniques improved, as more sites were excavated, as the patterns became clear, something unsettling emerged. The fires were too big, too regular, too deliberate. At Pinnacle Point, on the southern coast of what is now South Africa, researchers found evidence of controlled burns dating back more than 160,000 years. Not occasional fires, not accidental blazes, but systematic, repeated burning across vast landscapes, conducted over thousands of generations. 160,000 years. To put that in perspective, this is before anatomically modern humans had even left Africa. Before language as we know it may have fully formed. Before any of the technological markers we associate with civilization had appeared. And yet, these ancient people were manipulating their environment on a scale that we are only beginning to comprehend. The burns followed patterns. They coincided with seasonal changes. They targeted specific vegetation types. And most tellingly, they corresponded with dramatic shifts in local and regional climate. These were not campfires that got out of hand. These were deliberate, large-scale landscape modifications. But why? What drives a people with stone tools and no written language to set their world aflame? The conventional explanation is simple. Firestick farming. Early humans burned vegetation to encourage new growth, which attracted game animals, making hunting easier. It's a practice documented in Aboriginal Australia, among indigenous peoples of the Americas across Africa. Burning to create grazing lands, to clear underbrush, to manage resources. A sensible explanation. Practical. Contained. Except the scale is all wrong. The fires we're finding evidence of weren't localized burns to improve a hunting ground. They were continental-scale events. Synchronized pulses of burning that released enough carbon into the atmosphere to register in ice cores from Antarctica. Enough smoke to alter regional weather patterns. Enough heat to shift the very climate zones of entire subcontinents. And they weren't random. They corresponded with something else. Something the scientists didn't expect to find. In 2019, a team analyzing sediment cores from lakes across Africa, Europe, and Asia published a paper that received little attention outside specialist circles. They had found evidence of repeated warming pulses, small but significant increases in global temperature that occurred in a pattern throughout the late Pleistocene. These warming events lasted centuries, sometimes millennia, before cooling periods returned. The pattern was irregular but persistent, and it didn't match the Milankovitch cycles, the orbital variations that typically drive ice age rhythms. It didn't match solar variation. It didn't match volcanic activity patterns, but it did match something else. It matched the charcoal records, the burn layers, the fire signatures in the geological record. Every warming pulse corresponded with a dramatic increase in biomass burning across the inhabited world. And the inhabited world, by this point in human history, was expanding rapidly. Let that settle for a moment. Humans spreading across continents. Systematic, large-scale burning wherever they went. And a climate that warmed in response. Not over millions of years. Not through gradual natural processes alone. But over thousands of years, in pulses, in waves that followed human migration routes like a thermal shadow. If you were to look at a map of human expansion out of Africa, overlaid with a map of warming events between 100,000 and 10,000 years ago, you would see something remarkable. The patterns converge. Where humans went, fire followed. And where fire spread, the world warmed. This is not a comfortable realization. We need to talk about what fire actually does to a landscape and why it matters to climate. When you burn a forest, you're not just clearing land. You're releasing stored carbon, built up over decades or centuries in wood and soil, directly into the atmosphere. You're changing the albedo, the reflectivity of the Earth's surface, from dark forest that absorbs heat to lighter grassland or bare soil that reflects it, at least initially. You're altering water cycles, changing how much moisture returns to the atmosphere through plant transpiration. You're modifying wind patterns, rain patterns, temperature gradients. You're changing the machine. In modern climate science, we know that land use changes are one of the most significant human impacts on climate. Deforestation in the Amazon affects rainfall in North America. Agricultural expansion in Southeast Asia alters monsoon patterns. The conversion of forest to farmland across Europe changed the continent's climate over the Middle Ages. We know this because we can measure it. We can model it. We have satellites and sensors and centuries of recorded data. But what if this process started not with the Industrial Revolution, not with medieval agriculture, not even with Neolithic farming, but with our species' first steps across the globe? What if we have been climate engineers for 100,000 years? The evidence keeps accumulating in ways that make the conventional narrative harder and harder to maintain. In Australia, the megafauna extinctions have long been attributed to human arrival. Giant wombats, massive kangaroos, predatory marsupial lions, all disappeared relatively shortly after humans reached the continent, around 65,000 years ago. For years, the debate was simple. Did humans hunt them to extinction, or did climate change kill them? But recent analysis suggests something more complex. The extinctions didn't happen immediately. They occurred over thousands of years, in a rolling pattern across the continent. And they corresponded precisely with changes in vegetation, recorded in fossilized pollen. The diverse forests that sustained these megafauna gave way rapidly to the fire-adapted grasslands and eucalyptus woodlands that dominate Australia today. The continent didn't just change. It was changed, systematically burned over and over, until the very composition of the plant life shifted to species that could survive regular fires. The animals that depended on the old ecosystem died. The continent warmed. The interior dried out. Australia became the Australia we know, not through gradual evolution, but through deliberate, repeated burning over tens of thousands of years. And the people who did this weren't doing it by accident. Aboriginal Australian fire management practices, documented by early European colonists before they were largely suppressed, showed a sophisticated understanding of how fire shaped landscape. Different burns for different purposes. Cool burns to manage underbrush. Hot burns to clear land. Seasonal burns timed to weather patterns. A knowledge base that took thousands of years to develop. But what if that knowledge base was even older than we thought? What if the ancestors of Aboriginal Australians brought with them, from Africa and southern Asia, an already ancient tradition of landscape management through fire? What if they had already seen what fire could do to a continent? The same pattern appears in the Americas. When humans crossed from Asia, moving down through the ice-free corridors and spreading across least consider the possibility that they knew what they were doing, that they were terraforming. The word feels wrong, doesn't it? Terraforming is what science fiction civilizations do to Mars or Venus. It requires massive technology, space-age engineering, computational models, and industrial capacity. But what is terraforming, really, except the deliberate modification of a planet's environment to make it more suitable for a particular form of life? And what is systematic, continental-scale burning over tens of thousands of years, if not exactly that? The technology doesn't have to be complex. It just has to be persistent. And fire, wielded by enough hands across enough time, is perhaps the most powerful terraforming tool imaginable. Consider the scale of what we're suggesting. Modern climate models estimate that total human greenhouse gas emissions from the Industrial Revolution to today have raised global temperatures by about 1.2 degrees Celsius. That's from roughly 250 years of burning fossil fuels, clearing forests, and industrial agriculture. Now consider 100,000 years of regular biomass burning across expanding human ranges. Not continuous, not at industrial scales, but persistent, punctuated, intentional. The temperature increases wouldn't be as dramatic or as rapid as our modern climate change. But they would accumulate. They would shift boundaries. They would alter the patterns of glaciation and retreat, the timing of interglacial periods, the distribution of climate zones. They would leave signatures in the ice cores, in the sediment records, in the pollen data. Small anomalies that don't quite fit the natural cycles. Warming pulses that correspond with human activity. Carbon isotope ratios that suggest biomass burning on massive scales. All the signatures we're actually finding. In 2018, researchers working in the Amazon basin published findings that challenged everything we thought we knew about that ecosystem. The pristine rainforest, we were told, was untouched wilderness, the way nature intended it. But soil analysis and archaeological surveys revealed something different. Much of the Amazon, perhaps as much as 12%, shows signs of pre-Columbian modification. Not just scattered villages, but systematic landscape management. Controlled burns that created pockets of enriched soil, the famous terra preta. Selective encouragement of useful species. Earthworks and causeways that required moving millions of cubic meters of soil. The Amazon we think of as pristine was actually a managed ecosystem, shaped by humans for thousands of years. And when European diseases wiped out 90% of the indigenous population in the 16th century, the forest exploded into the areas that had been kept open. The wilderness we romanticize is actually an abandoned garden, returned to a more forested state after its gardeners died. But here's what's important. During the periods of most intensive indigenous management, during the centuries and millennia when millions of people lived in and actively shaped the Amazon, the climate records show something interesting. The region was slightly drier, slightly warmer than we might expect. Fire frequency was higher. Carbon release from biomass burning was elevated. And then, after the population collapse, after the burning stopped, the forest regrew with explosive vigor. It got wetter. It got cooler. The regional climate shifted. The humans weren't just living in the environment. They were maintaining it in a particular state. And when they disappeared, it reverted. If this is true in the Amazon, a region we thought we understood, what else are we missing? What other landscapes have we misread as natural when they were actually the product of millennia of deliberate management? What if almost every landscape humans have inhabited for more than a few thousand years has been shaped, maintained, optimized for human purposes? And what if that shaping included, whether intentionally or as an understood consequence, manipulation of local and regional climate? There's a moment in considering all of this when you have to confront something deeply uncomfortable about human nature. We are taught to think of environmental destruction as a modern failing, that our ancestors lived in harmony with nature, that only industrial civilization has disrupted the balance, that there was once a golden age when humans were just another species in the ecosystem, neither dominating nor destroying. It's a comforting myth. It lets us imagine that our current crisis is an aberration, that we can return to some more natural state, that the problem is capitalism or industry or modern technology, not something fundamental about what we are. But what if the evidence suggests otherwise? What if the drive to reshape our environment to suit our needs, regardless of consequences to other species, regardless of long-term climate effects, regardless of what we destroy in the process, is not a modern invention but our oldest inheritance? What if we have always been this way? The megafauna extinctions that followed human expansion across the globe weren't accidents. They weren't the unfortunate byproduct of a little overhunting. They were the predictable result of systematic ecosystem transformation. We didn't just kill those animals. We removed the world they needed to survive and replaced it with a world that suited us better. And we did it everywhere we went. Australia, the Americas, Madagascar, New Zealand, dozens of islands across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Every time humans arrived in a new land, a wave of extinctions followed. The larger the animal, the more likely it was to disappear. Not because we hunted them directly, though we did that too, but because we burned their forests, dried out their wetlands, converted their habitats into the grasslands and open woodlands where our preferred prey species thrived. We optimized the world for ourselves, and to hell with everything else. The only places where megafauna survived in significant numbers were regions where they had co-evolved with humans, where they had hundreds of thousands of years to learn to fear us, to adapt to our presence. Africa, parts of Asia. These animals survived not because humans there were more conservation-minded, but because we were a familiar threat, one they had time to evolve defenses against. Everywhere else, we were the asteroid impact, the catastrophic event that reset the ecosystem. And we knew we were doing it. That's the part that troubles me most. This wasn't ignorant destruction. The timescales are too long, the patterns too consistent, the practices too sophisticated. Oral traditions from indigenous cultures around the world contain detailed knowledge of fire management, of landscape modification, of the long-term consequences of burning practices. This wasn't accidental knowledge. It was carefully maintained wisdom, passed down through generations, about how to shape the world. They knew that if you burn in spring, you get different results than burning in fall. They knew that cool burns versus hot burns created different landscapes. They knew which plants would return, which animals would follow, how the water would move differently, how the wind would change. They knew. And yet they did it anyway. For tens of thousands of years. Across every continent. Transforming landscapes, eliminating species, warming the climate in pulses that we can still detect in ice cores and sediment records. Why? The conventional answer is survival. They were doing what they needed to do to feed themselves, to make the land more productive, to increase carrying capacity. It was practical adaptation. But the scale suggests something beyond mere survival. You don't need to burn an entire continent to survive. You don't need to systematically transform ecosystems across thousands of miles to have enough food. You don't need to warm the global climate to make it through winter. No, this suggests something more ambitious. Something that we've been reluctant to attribute to people we've labeled primitive. It suggests they were experimenting, testing how far they could push the system, seeing what was possible, learning the limits and capacities of the planetary climate system through direct manipulation over thousands of generations. They were doing science in their way. Not with papers and peer review, but with observation and experiment and carefully maintained oral tradition. Hypothesis. Burning creates grassland. Test. Burn and observe for generations. Result. Yes, burning creates grassland, and it also changes rainfall patterns, and it also shifts temperature averages, and it also eliminates forest species while encouraging grassland species. Hypothesis. If we burn enough, can we make the ice retreat? Can we extend the range of temperate zones? Can we make more of the planet suitable for us? Test. Burn. Burn systematically. Burn everywhere you can reach. Burn for 1,000 generations and see what happens. Result. The ice does retreat faster than it would naturally. The climate does warm in pulses that correspond with your burning. The world does reshape itself around your fires. But there are consequences. Species die. Ecosystems collapse. Some regions that you made warmer become too dry to sustain the new populations you've encouraged there. The system is more complex than you anticipated, and the changes ripple outward in ways you can't fully predict or control. And yet, you continue, because you've learned the most important lesson. The planet can be changed. The climate can be manipulated. The world is not fixed but the climate is warmer and drier. The interior desert has expanded. 30,000 years ago, they're burning across Southeast Asia, through China into Siberia. 20,000 years ago, they cross into the Americas. Within 5,000 years, both continents are transformed. The pattern is undeniable. Wherever humans go, fire follows. Wherever fire spreads, ecosystems change. Wherever ecosystems change, climate shifts. We are not adapters. We are transformers. And the question remains, was this intentional climate engineering? Or was it the unintended consequence of practical land management? Did they understand they were warming the planet? Or did they just notice that burning was useful and kept doing it, blind to the cumulative effects? The answer, I suspect, is somewhere in between. They knew burning warmed the land locally. They could observe that over generations. They could feel the difference between burned and unburned areas. They understood cause and effect at that scale. Whether they understood global climate, whether they conceived of the planet as a single system that could be manipulated at continental scales, that's harder to say. Probably not at first. Probably not for most of human prehistory. But knowledge accumulates. Oral traditions preserve and transmit understanding. And humans are very, very good at recognizing patterns, even patterns that play out over timescales longer than individual lives. I think, by the time we reached the late Pleistocene, by the time humans were established on every continent except Antarctica, there were people who understood. Shamans, elders, knowledge keepers who maintained the long memory, who could see in the oral histories how the burning had changed things, how the climate had shifted, how the world had warmed in response to human activity. And I think they chose to continue. There's a particular moment in the ice core data that troubles me deeply. Around 15,000 years ago, the last ice age is ending. The Milankovitch cycles, those orbital variations that pace the glacial rhythms, have shifted. The northern hemisphere is receiving more summer sunlight. The great ice sheets that covered Canada and Scandinavia are beginning their retreat. This is expected. This is natural. The ice age was going to end anyway, but it ends faster than it should. The models, when you remove human influence, predict a slower warming. The ice should retreat gradually over several thousand years. Instead, it collapses in pulses. Rapid warming events, separated by periods of stability or even slight cooling, creating a sawtooth pattern in the temperature record. And each warming pulse corresponds with elevated biomass burning across the inhabited world. The most dramatic of these is the Balling-Alarod warming, around 14,700 years ago. In the space of perhaps 50 years, maybe less, the global temperature spikes by several degrees. The ice sheets lose mass catastrophically. Sea levels rise rapidly. Ecosystems are thrown into chaos. Conventional climate science attributes this to changes in ocean circulation, to the collapse of ice dams, to feedback loops in the climate system. All of which is true. These mechanisms absolutely played a role. But there's another signature in the data. A massive spike in biomass burning, beginning slightly before the rapid warming and continuing throughout it. Fires on a scale unprecedented in the previous 100,000 years. Charcoal layers in sediment cores from every inhabited continent. Pollen records showing sudden, dramatic vegetation changes. Smoke layers in ice cores from Greenland thick enough to see with the naked eye. What if the feedback loop included us? What if, as the ice began its natural retreat, as the climate began to warm, humans responded by burning even more extensively? What if we saw the opportunity, the possibility of pushing the ice back faster, of accelerating the process, of claiming more land, of expanding our range? What if we deliberately amplified the natural warming? The timing is suspect. The burning increases before the most rapid warming, as if anticipating it, as if responding to early signs of climate shift with a calculated effort to enhance and accelerate the trend. This would require a sophisticated understanding of climate dynamics. It would require coordinated action across vast distances. It would require some form of communication between groups separated by thousands of miles. It would require, in short, exactly the kind of long-range planning and complex social organization that we know humans had developed by this point. We had trade networks that moved obsidian and shells and other goods thousands of miles. We had artistic traditions that spread across continents. We had oral traditions that maintained detailed knowledge over countless generations. Why wouldn't we have traditions about climate? Why wouldn't we have knowledge keepers who understood the signs, who could read the patterns in animal migration and plant growth and ice extent, who could coordinate burning efforts across regions? We think of civilization as requiring writing, cities, formal institutions. But organization can exist without any of those things. Complexity can emerge from oral tradition and shared practice and carefully maintained knowledge. And the results speak for themselves. The ice retreated faster than natural mechanisms alone would predict. The warming was amplified. The world changed more rapidly, more dramatically, than it had in previous deglaciation events. We might have done that. We might have pushed the climate system into a state change, triggering feedback loops that ended the Ice Age centuries or millennia earlier than it would have ended otherwise. We might have terraformed the planet out of the Pleistocene and into the Holocene, the stable climate period that allowed agriculture and cities and everything we call civilization to develop. And if we did, it raises a question so profound I've been circling it for this entire script, approaching it obliquely, afraid to state it directly. Why did we stop? Because we did stop. Around 10,000 years ago, the climate stabilized. The wild temperature swings of the late Pleistocene ended. The Holocene began, and with it, a period of unusual climate stability that has lasted until the present day. And the burning patterns change. They don't stop, but they localize. They become part of agricultural practice, land clearing for farms, management of pastures and fields. The continental scale pulses of burning, the synchronized fire events that show up so clearly in the late Pleistocene record, those fade away. We go from apparent climate engineering to mere agriculture, from active planetary management to passive land use, from terraforming to farming. Why? Did we succeed? Did we push the climate into the state we wanted, the warm, stable Holocene, and then shift to maintenance mode rather than continued active manipulation? Did we fail? Did we realize we were triggering changes we couldn't control, that the feedback loops were too complex, that we were risking catastrophic shifts we couldn't predict? Did we pull back in fear? Or did we forget? Did the knowledge keepers die? Did the oral traditions fail? Did the long memory that understood climate manipulation over deep time get lost in the transition to agriculture and settlement? Did we become so focused on farming specific plots of land that we lost the perspective that once let us think in terms of continents and millennia? The archaeological record suggests something changed around the beginning of the Holocene. Population structures shifted. Social complexity increased in some ways but decreased in others. The mobile hunter-gatherer bands that had dominated human organization for hundreds of thousands of years began giving way to settled communities. With settlement comes a different time horizon. When you're mobile, when you move with the seasons and the herds, you think in terms of large landscapes and long patterns. You see the big picture because you're always moving through it. But when you settle, when you commit to a specific place, your focus narrows. You care about this valley, this river, this field. The continental patterns become less relevant. The deep time knowledge becomes less immediately useful. Maybe that's when we forgot. When we transitioned to agriculture, we traded the long view for the deep investment. We gave up the ability to think in terms of planetary engineering in exchange for the ability to build cities and civilizations. We stopped being terraformers and became farmers. But there's another possibility, one that is perhaps most unsettling of all. What if we didn't stop because we forgot or because we succeeded or because we were afraid of what we were doing? What if we stopped because someone else started? I want you to consider the timeline carefully. The last major warming pulse driven by massive biomass burning occurs around 11,700 years ago, at the beginning of the Holocene. After that, the climate stabilizes in a way it hasn't for millions of years. No more wild swings. No more rapid warming events followed by sudden cooling. Just steady, predictable conditions that persist for 10,000 years. It's not natural. Interglacial periods, the warm phases between ice ages, typically last 10 to 15,000 years, and they're not usually this stable. They feature variability, regional climate shifts, periods of warming and cooling. The Holocene is uniquely, suspiciously stable. And into this period of remarkable stability, agriculture appears. Independently in multiple locations around the world, within a span of just but some of them are different. Some of them appear right around the time of the transition to agriculture. Genes related to starch digestion, to processing grain-heavy diets, to tolerating the nutrition profiles of cultivated crops rather than wild foods. Genes that look, if you squint and allow yourself to think the unthinkable, engineered. Let's step back from the edge of that particular cliff and return to firmer ground. Whether or not there was intervention, whether or not agriculture was given rather than invented, one thing is absolutely clear. Humans spent over 100,000 years actively manipulating planetary climate through controlled burning, and then we stopped. Or rather, we changed methods. We went from extensive burning to intensive farming. From mobile landscape management to settled agriculture. From thinking in terms of continents to thinking in terms of fields. And for 10,000 years, that worked. The Holocene climate remained stable. Human population grew slowly at first, then exponentially. Cities rose. Civilizations developed. Writing, mathematics, philosophy, science, art, all the things we associate with human achievement blossomed in that stable climate window. We forgot we had ever been terraformers. We forgot the deep-time knowledge of climate manipulation. It became myth, then less than myth. It became invisible, erased from our understanding of our own past. We told ourselves we were passive recipients of our environment until very recently. That our ancestors had no impact on global systems until the Industrial Revolution. That climate change was something that happened to us, not something we had been doing all along. And then we started burning again. Not forests this time, but fossil fuels. Ancient solar energy, stored in coal and oil and gas, released in a few centuries at a rate that makes our Pleistocene burning look trivial. We've put more carbon into the atmosphere in the last 200 years than humans managed in the previous 100,000. We've warmed the planet by more than a degree Celsius in a span of time that, in deep time terms, is essentially instantaneous. We're doing it again. The same pattern, the same impulse, the same disregard for consequences. The only difference is that this time we know what we're doing. We have the instruments to measure it. We have the models to predict it. We have the historical record to show us what happens when climate shifts rapidly. And we're doing it anyway. This is what troubles me most about the evidence of Pleistocene climate engineering. Not that our ancestors did it. Not even that they may have done it deliberately. What troubles me is the revelation that this is who we are. This is what humans do. We reshape our environment to suit our needs, regardless of the cost, regardless of the consequences, regardless of what we destroy in the process. We did it with fire and it worked for a while, until the system became unstable and something had to change. Now we're doing it with fossil fuels and it's working for a while until the system becomes unstable and something will have to change. The pattern repeats. The scale changes but the behavior remains constant. We are terraformers. It's in our nature. We cannot simply live in the world as it is. We must make it into what we want it to be. The question is whether we can learn to do it sustainably. Whether we can manage planetary systems without breaking them. Whether we can terraform wisely rather than recklessly. Because make no mistake, we're not going to stop. The impulse is too deep. It's been part of human behavior for longer than we've been anatomically modern. It might predate our species entirely, going back to Homo erectus with their controlled fires 1 million years ago. We are going to continue reshaping Earth. And eventually, if we survive long enough, we will reshape other worlds. Mars, Venus, the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. We will make them into versions of Earth, or versions of what we wish Earth could be. The question is not whether we'll terraform. The question is whether we'll learn to do it without catastrophe. Whether we'll develop the wisdom to match our capability. Whether we can think in terms of deep time and planetary systems and consequences that play out over millennia. Our Pleistocene ancestors had one advantage over us. Their technology was limited. Fire can only do so much. It can alter regional climates and drive species to extinction and shift vegetation patterns, but it's self-limiting. You can only burn what's there, and then you have to wait for it to grow back. Our technology has no such limits. We can extract millions of years of stored carbon and release it in decades. We can alter the chemistry of the entire atmosphere. We can change planetary systems faster than they can respond, faster than evolution can adapt, faster than we can fully understand what we're doing. We have the power of terraformers without the wisdom of terraformers. We're children playing with the climate controls of a planet, and we're surprised when things break. But here's the thing, we've done this before. Not at this scale, not with these tools, but we've walked this path. We've pushed climate systems into new states. We've triggered feedback loops. We've altered the fundamental conditions of the planet. And we survived. Humanity made it through the climate chaos of the late Pleistocene. We made it through the transition to the Holocene. We adapted or were adapted or found our way somehow to a stable state that allowed civilization to develop. Which means we might make it through this too. Not unchanged. Not without cost. Not without losing things we value. But we might survive our own impact on the planet because we've done it before. That's the paradox at the heart of this. The evidence of ancient climate engineering is terrifying because it shows that we've always been this way, that our current crisis is not an aberration but an expression of deep human nature. But it's also hopeful because it shows we've survived our own worst impulses before. We've pushed the climate to the edge and then somehow stepped back or been pulled back or found a new equilibrium. Maybe we can do it again. Maybe the knowledge is still there, buried in our collective memory, waiting to be remembered. Maybe we're not children playing with the climate controls. Maybe we're ancient terraformers who forgot what we were, and we're just now beginning to remember. I want to return to that image from the beginning. The darkened sky, the fires burning in patterns across continents, the smoke rolling across the world. But now I want you to add something to that image. Add the people. Not primitives. Not savages stumbling through a world they don't understand. But people like us. Complex, intelligent, capable of long-term planning and abstract thought. People who could track patterns across generations, who could coordinate action across vast distances, who could look at the world and see not just what it was but what it could become. People who understood that fire could reshape landscapes. That burned land was warmer land. That warmer land could support different plants, different animals, different human populations. People who decided, collectively, across cultures and continents, to burn the world until it suited them better. Was it survival? Of course. Everything humans do is ultimately about survival, about passing genes to the next generation, about ensuring the continuation of our lineage. But was it only survival? Was it purely reactive, purely adaptive, purely a response to immediate needs? Or was it also curiosity, also experimentation, also the same impulse that would later drive us to build pyramids and cathedrals, to paint caves and compose symphonies, to split atoms and sequence genomes? Were we doing science? Were we testing the limits of what was possible, seeing how far we could push the system, learning the rules of planetary climate through direct manipulation over thousands of generations? I think we were. I think the burning was practical and experimental and artistic all at once. I think our ancestors were doing climate engineering for the same mix of reasons we do anything complex. Because we needed to, because we wanted to, because we could, because we were curious what would happen. And I think they learned something profound, something we've forgotten and are only now beginning to relearn. They learned that planets are not fixed, that climate is not destiny, that the world can be changed if you understand the mechanisms and apply force persistently over deep time. They learned that humans are not separate from nature but part of it, and a powerful part, capable of influencing systems at the largest scales. They learned that there are consequences to planetary engineering, that the changes ripple outward in unexpected ways, that you can trigger feedback loops you can't control. And I think eventually they learned to be careful. Not through wisdom necessarily. Maybe through fear. Maybe through catastrophe. Maybe through intervention from something that saw what we were doing and decided we needed to be limited, directed, given a new path. But somehow, the climate engineering stopped or transformed into something more manageable. The wild burning of the Pleistocene gave way to the careful agriculture of the Holocene. The mobile terraformers became settled farmers. And for 10,000 years, it worked. The climate stayed stable. Humanity flourished. We built everything we think of as civilization within that stable climate window. But now that window is closing. We're destabilizing the climate again, through different means but with the same fundamental pattern. We're burning fossil forests and conscious terraformers. We can acknowledge what we're doing, accept responsibility for it, and start making intentional choices about what we want Earth to become. This doesn't mean we stop changing the planet. We can't. We're too numerous, too powerful, too fundamentally driven to reshape our environment. Even if we wanted to leave Earth alone, we couldn't. Our mere existence in these numbers alters planetary systems. But we can change how we do it. We can think in terms of deep time. We can consider consequences that play out over centuries and millennia. We can use the full weight of science and technology to model outcomes, to test approaches, to avoid catastrophes. We can learn from our ancestors, not the recent ones, the farmers and city builders of the Holocene, but the ancient ones, the Pleistocene terraformers who shaped continents with nothing but fire and persistence. They showed us that planets can be changed, that human action, applied consistently over deep time, can alter climate systems, that we are not separate from Earth but a force within it, capable of influencing the largest scales. They also showed us the risks, the extinctions, the unstable climate swings, the feedback loops that amplify change beyond prediction. And somehow they or we or something found a way to stabilize the system, to create the Holocene, that remarkable period of climate stability that allowed everything we think of as civilization to develop. We need to do that again. We need to stabilize. Not at pre-industrial conditions. That ship has sailed. Not by returning to some imagined natural state that humans have never actually experienced, but by consciously managing the system, using all our accumulated knowledge, thinking in terms of planetary engineering because that's what we're doing whether we admit it or not. This is not a popular message. People want to hear that we can just stop, that we can reduce emissions to zero and let nature restore balance, that we can return to being just another species in the ecosystem. But the evidence suggests otherwise. It suggests we've been the dominant force in Earth's climate for 100,000 years. It suggests that human impact on planetary systems is not an aberration of the industrial age but a deep pattern that defines our species. It suggests we are terraformers. We have always been terraformers. We will always be terraformers. The only question is what we terraform toward. I don't have the answer to that. I don't think anyone does. It's a question that requires input from every human culture, every knowledge tradition, every philosophical and spiritual framework we've developed. But I know we need to start asking it. We need to stop pretending that climate change is something that happened to us and acknowledge that it's something we've been doing all along. We need to bring the unconscious pattern into consciousness and make it intentional. We need to remember what we are. Not noble savages living in harmony with nature. Not industrial villains destroying a pristine world. But ancient climate engineers who forgot their own nature and are only now beginning to remember. The fires are burning again. The carbon is rising. The climate is shifting. The pattern repeats. But this time we have a choice our ancestors didn't. We have the tools to model planetary systems. We have the technology to manipulate them with precision. We have the knowledge, if we choose to use it, to terraform consciously rather than accidentally. We have the opportunity to be good at what we've been doing all along. The smoke is rising. The world is warming. The question hangs in the air like ash. What are we building? What world are we making? And when we look back from 100,000 years in the future, when our descendants examine the geological record of our time, what will they see? Another catastrophe? Another wave of extinctions and unstable climate? Or the moment when humanity learned to terraform wisely, when we remembered what we were and chose to be it consciously, with care, with thought for the deep time consequences? The fires are burning. They've always been burning. We set them long ago, and they've never gone out. Now we get to decide what we're forging in those flames. Look at your hands for a moment. The same hands, structurally, that held the first torch 140,000 years ago. The same neural architecture that made the connection between fire and landscape transformation. The same brain that could observe patterns across generations, that could share knowledge, that could coordinate action across vast distances without writing or formal institutions. We haven't changed, not really. Our tools have evolved, our understanding has deepened, our technology has become exponentially more powerful. But the fundamental impulse, the drive to reshape our environment to suit our needs, that's as old as our species or older. And it's not unique to humans, not entirely. Beavers terraform. They build dams that flood valleys, that change river courses, that create entire ecosystems. Earthworms terraform. They restructure soil, alter its chemistry, change which plants can grow. Coral polyps terraform. They build reefs that shelter thousands of species, that affect ocean currents and coastal erosion. Life transforms planets. That's what life does. It takes non-living matter and converts it into more life, and in the process, it changes everything. Earth's atmosphere was created by life. The oxygen we breathe is pollution from ancient cyanobacteria that nearly wiped out all other life when they first evolved photosynthesis. The soil beneath our feet is the result of billions of years of life breaking down rock and mixing it with organic matter. Life terraforms. Humans are just doing it faster and more deliberately than most species. But that speed, that deliberation, that's what creates the crisis. Natural terraforming happens slowly enough for ecosystems to adapt. When cyanobacteria started producing oxygen, it took millions of years for the atmosphere to change, millions more for oxygen-breathing life to evolve. When plants colonized land and started forming soil, the process unfolded over geological time. We're changing the planet on timescales of decades and centuries. Evolution can't keep up. Ecosystems can't adjust. The feedback loops engage faster than the moderating mechanisms can respond. We're terraforming at tectonic speed with biological tools. And that mismatch, that's where the danger lies. Our Pleistocene ancestors had the same mismatch, just smaller. They terraformed faster than natural processes could compensate. They drove species extinct. They altered climate on timescales of centuries rather than millions of years. But their tools were limited. Fire can only spread so fast. Burned areas recover. The system could absorb their impact, barely, with disruptions but not total collapse. Our tools have no such limits. We can extract and burn millions of years of accumulated carbon in decades. We can alter ocean chemistry faster than anything except asteroid impacts. We can change planetary temperature at rates unseen in the geological record outside of catastrophes. We're using terraforming power on a timescale that guarantees disruption. And unlike our ancestors, we can see exactly what we're doing. We have the measurements, the models, the predictions. We know where this leads. And yet we continue. Not because we're evil or stupid or suicidal, but because the same impulse that drove our ancestors to burn continents drives us now. The need to survive. The desire to improve conditions for ourselves and our children. The curiosity about what's possible. The inability to simply leave the world alone. We are terraformers. We cannot stop being terraformers any more than beavers can stop building dams. But we can choose what we terraform toward. We can decide what kind of Earth we want to create. And this is where it gets complicated. Because there is no consensus. There is no unified human vision of what Earth should be. Some want to preserve it as it is, or as it was before industrial civilization. They see any change as damage, any human impact as negative. They want wilderness, biodiversity, natural processes dominating over human management. Others want to optimize Earth for human flourishing. Maximum food production, comfortable temperatures, managed ecosystems that serve human needs. They see the planet as a resource, a garden to be cultivated, a system to be engineered for our benefit. Still others want to preserve the stability of the Holocene, the conditions that allowed civilization to develop. They see the climate of the last 10,000 years as a sweet spot, neither too wild nor too controlled, and they want to maintain it. And some see Earth as a stepping stone. They want to develop the technology and knowledge to terraform other planets, and they see our current crisis as a learning opportunity. If we can stabilize Earth's climate through conscious engineering, we can apply those lessons to Mars, to Venus, to worlds beyond our solar system. All of these visions are held by intelligent, thoughtful people. All have merit. All have problems. And the tension between them, the inability to choose a direction, that's paralyzing us. We're terraforming unconsciously by default through the accumulated weight of 8 billion people pursuing individual needs. But we're not terraforming toward any coherent goal because we can't agree on what that goal should be. Maybe that to acknowledge what we are, accept the responsibility that comes with our power, and make deliberate decisions about what we're building. Because the alternative is to repeat the pattern blindly, to terraform unconsciously, to drive changes we don't understand, to trigger feedbacks we can't control, until the system breaks or forces a correction. We've done that before. The megafauna extinctions were unconscious terraforming, or at least not fully conscious of the consequences. The Pleistocene climate instability was us learning the power we wielded. The transition to the Holocene was the system stabilizing, whether through our choice or through correction from something else. But this time we have no excuse for unconsciousness. We have all the data. We have the models. We have the historical record. We know exactly what we're doing and where it leads. If we choose to continue unconscious terraforming, it's not because we don't know better. It's because we're refusing to look, refusing to accept what we know, refusing to take responsibility for our own nature. And that, perhaps, is the most unsettling part of this entire exploration. Not that our ancestors terraformed continents with fire. Not that we're doing it again with fossil fuels. But that we might choose to do it unconsciously, to close our eyes and pretend we don't know what we're doing, even when the evidence is overwhelming. That would be the real tragedy. Not the climate change itself, but the refusal to acknowledge it as our own creation. The refusal to own our role as planetary engineers. The refusal to take responsibility for what we've been doing for 100,000 years. We are terraformers. We have been terraformers since before we were fully human. We will be terraformers as long as our species exists. The question is not whether to terraform. The question is whether to do it consciously or unconsciously, carefully or recklessly, with wisdom or with willful blindness. Our Pleistocene ancestors, with their stone tools and oral traditions, somehow found their way to stability or had it found for them. They survived their own impact on the planet. We have so much more knowledge than they did. So much more technology. So much more capacity to model, predict, and manage planetary systems. But do we have the wisdom? Do we have the courage to look clearly at what we are and accept the responsibility that comes with it? That's the question we're answering right now, in this moment, with every choice we make about energy and land use and climate policy. Are we conscious terraformers? Or are we clever apes playing with forces we refuse to acknowledge? The smoke is rising. The world is changing. The fires we set 100,000 years ago have never gone out. They've just changed fuel. And the question that hangs in the air, written in carbon and heat and rising seas, is whether we'll finally acknowledge what we're doing and choose to do it well, or whether we'll close our eyes and pretend the fires aren't ours, even as the world burns. There's a specific moment documented in the ice cores that I find myself returning to. It's around 12,800 years ago, at the beginning of a period called the Younger Dryas. The world was warming. The Ice Age was ending. The great ice sheets were retreating. And then, suddenly, catastrophically, the climate reversed. In perhaps a single decade, maybe less, temperatures plunged back to glacial conditions. The ice returned. The warming stopped. For 1,300 years, Earth was locked in a brief return to Ice Age cold. Then, just as suddenly, it ended. The climate warmed rapidly, more rapidly than it had before, and this time the warming stuck. The Holocene began. What happened? The conventional explanation involves ocean circulation. Meltwater from retreating ice sheets poured into the North Atlantic, disrupting the currents that carry heat from the tropics to the poles. The system shut down. Europe and North America froze. Then the ice dam broke, the meltwater drained, the currents restarted, and the warming resumed. It's a good explanation. The evidence supports it. The mechanism is understood. But there's something else in the data from that period. Something we don't talk about as much. The biomass burning stops. Almost completely. Across the world, the charcoal signatures in sediment cores, which had been high throughout the late Pleistocene, dropped to nearly nothing during the Younger Dryas. And then, When the warming resumes, the burning resumes too, but different. More localized. More controlled. Associated with early agricultural sites rather than continental-scale landscape management. What if the Younger Dryas wasn't just a climate accident? What if it was a response to the Pleistocene climate engineering? What if the system, pushed too far by human burning, snapped back, overcompensated, locked itself in an unstable state? And what if the cessation of burning during that period wasn't because it was too cold to burn, but because humans stopped? Because we learned during that frozen millennium what happened when we pushed too hard? What if the Younger Dryas was our first climate catastrophe, the consequence of 10,000 generations of systematic burning, and the Holocene is what we built afterward, consciously or unconsciously, when we changed our approach? I'm speculating now, pushing beyond what the evidence can firmly support. But the pattern is there. Massive burning, climate instability, sudden cooling, cessation of burning, rapid warming, stable climate, agricultural transition. It reads like a story, like a lesson learned the hard way, like humanity pushing the climate to a breaking point, experiencing the consequences, and then finding a different path. If this is true, if the Younger Dryas was feedback from our own climate engineering, then we've been here before. We've already triggered a climate catastrophe. We've already seen what happens when we push the system too far. And we survived. We adapted. We changed our behavior. We found a way forward that allowed 10,000 years of relative stability. The question is whether we've forgotten that lesson, or whether it's still there, buried in our collective memory, waiting to be accessed. Because we're doing it again. We're pushing the climate hard, faster than our ancestors could have imagined. We're triggering feedbacks, destabilizing systems, racing toward tipping points. Are we going to hit another Younger Dryas? A sudden snap, a reversal, a plunge into instability? Or have we already passed that point? Are we in the midst of the catastrophe already, just moving too fast to recognize it clearly? The ice cores show that climate can change with shocking rapidity. A decade to shift from warming to freezing. A few years to reverse that shift. The systems that regulate planetary temperature are powerful but not stable. They have thresholds, tipping points, sudden state changes. We think of climate as gradual because the changes we've observed in human history have been relatively smooth. But the deep time record shows that's not always true. Climate can flip. Systems can reorganize. Stable states can collapse into chaos. And we're prodding those systems with increasing force, testing their limits, seeing how much they can absorb. It's possible we'll get lucky, that the feedbacks will be weaker than we fear, that the tipping points are farther away than we think, that we'll have time to transition to renewable energy and reduce emissions before we trigger anything irreversible. But the Pleistocene record suggests we shouldn't count on luck. It suggests that persistent pressure on climate systems, even with primitive tools, can trigger dramatic changes. And our tools are no longer primitive. We need to consider the possibility that we're going to trigger a state change, that the climate system is going to reorganize rapidly and dramatically in response to the stress we're applying. And we need to think about what we do if that happens, how we survive it, how we maintain civilization through a period of rapid climate instability, how we learn from it, as our ancestors apparently did after the Younger Dryas, and build something more stable afterward. This is not defeatism. It's not giving up on mitigation or adaptation. It's recognizing that we might not succeed in preventing catastrophe, and we need to be prepared for that possibility. We need to preserve knowledge. That's the most important thing. Whatever happens to the climate, whatever disruptions we face, we need to maintain the accumulated wisdom of civilization. The science, the technology, the understanding of what we did and why and how to do it differently. We need to maintain seed banks and genetic repositories, cultural knowledge and technical skills, the tools to rebuild if we have to rebuild. We need to think in terms of deep time, of passing knowledge across generations, even if those generations face hardships we can't imagine. We need to be the ancestors that future humans will thank for preserving what mattered. Because if the pattern holds, if we're truly repeating the Pleistocene cycle of climate manipulation and catastrophe and recovery, then we're not at the end of the story. We're in the middle, the hard part, the transition, And what matters is not whether we can prevent all consequences of what we've done. It's too late for that. The carbon is in the atmosphere. The feedbacks are beginning to engage. The system is already changing. What matters is whether we can maintain coherence through the transition. Whether we can preserve knowledge and capacity and human dignity while the world reorganizes around. Whether we do it blindly or with eyes open. Whether we deny our nature or embrace it. Whether we terraform unconsciously or consciously. And that choice, that shift from unconscious to conscious, that might be the most important transition our species ever makes. Not from hunter-gatherers to farmers. Not from pre-industrial to industrial. But from accidental terraformers to intentional ones. From a species that reshapes planets without meaning to a species that does so with full awareness and responsibility. That's the transition we're in the middle of right now. Whether we make it or not, whether we survive our own power or are destroyed by it, that's what this moment in history is about. We're learning to see ourselves clearly, to understand what we've been doing all along, to accept the responsibility that comes with our power. We're learning to be conscious. And if we can complete that transition, if we can become truly aware planetary managers instead of clever but blind apes playing with fire, then maybe we have a future. Maybe we can make it through the climate crisis and build something stable on the other side. Maybe we can become the species we've always had the potential to be. Terraformers, engineers, gardeners of worlds. Not separate from nature, part of it, the part that shapes, the part that decides, the part that bears responsibility for the whole. That's what's possible. That's what we could become. If we're brave enough to look at ourselves clearly, to acknowledge what we are, to accept the power and the responsibility and the deep-time consequences of being the species that changes planets. The smoke is rising. The fires are burning. They've been burning for 100,000 years. The question is not whether we're terraformers. The question is whether we'll finally admit it and learn to do it well. I want to leave you with one final image. One more layer to add to that vision of fires burning across continents, of smoke rolling across the ancient world. At time, compress it. Watch the long span of human history in fast forward. The first fires on the African coast, small bright points in the darkness, then spreading, multiplying, moving north and east and south, following human migration, pulsing with the seasons, growing brighter as populations increase. Watch the fires cross into Europe, into Asia. See them spread across the landmass. Watch the forests shrink, the grasslands expand. See the light from burning penetrate every corner of the habitable world. Then watch them cross to Australia. Watch that continent burn, repeatedly, systematically, for 60,000 years. Watch the megafauna disappear. Watch the vegetation change. Watch the desert expand. Watch the fires cross to the Americas. Watch them sweep down both continents in a wave. Watch another round of megafauna extinctions. Watch landscapes transform from forests to grasslands. And all the while, watch the climate respond. Watch the temperatures fluctuate. Watch the ice retreat and advance and retreat again, influenced by orbital cycles but also by the fires, by the carbon release, by the systematic burning of continents. Watch the younger dryas. Watch the fires dim, almost go out. Watch the world freeze. Then watch the fires return, different now, localized, controlled. Watch agriculture appear. Watch the settlements grow into cities. Watch the fires concentrate. And then watch them explode. Watch the Industrial Revolution. Watch the new kind of burning, fossil burning, coal and oil and gas. Watch it dwarf everything that came before. Watch the carbon pulse grow exponentially. Watch the temperature curve bend upward. Watch the ice retreat, faster now than at any time in the record. Watch the seas rise. Watch the ecosystems strain and shift and collapse. Watch the consequences of 150,000 years of burning accelerate into a few critical decades. And then, if we're successful, if we make the transition, watch the fires change again. Watch them shift to different fuel, renewable energy, controlled fusion maybe. Watch the carbon curve bend downward as we figure out how to remove what we've added. Watch the temperature stabilize. Watch a new equilibrium establish itself. Watch us become conscious terraformers, managing the planet intentionally, maintaining Earth in a state that supports both human civilization and ecosystem health. Or watch it go the other way. Watch the fires burn out of control. Watch the feedbacks engage. Watch the climate system destabilize beyond our ability to manage. Watch civilization collapse under the strain. Watch the human population crash. Watch the fires dim again, this time not by choice but by catastrophe. And then watch the recovery. Watch life adapt as it always does. Watch new ecosystems form in the changed world. Watch the surviving humans rebuild, slowly, carrying forward whatever knowledge they manage to preserve. Watch them light new fires. Watch the pattern begin again. Because that's the thing about being a terraforming species. Even catastrophe doesn't end it. Even collapse doesn't change what we are. As long as humans exist, we will shape our environment. We will use fire or its equivalent. We will alter ecosystems and influence climate. The pattern repeats because it's fundamental to what we are. So the question is never whether we terraform. The question is whether we do it in a way that's sustainable over deep time. Whether we can maintain the balance between our needs and the planet's capacity. Whether we can be wise enough to avoid catastrophe or resilient enough to recover when we fail. Our Pleistocene ancestors figured this out somehow. They burned continents for 100,000 years, drove species extinct, destabilized climate, and then found their way to stability. Or had it imposed on them. Or stumbled into it by chance. However it happened, it happened. The Holocene emerged. Stability persisted. Civilization developed. We're trying to do it again now under harder conditions with higher stakes with less room for error. But we have advantages they didn't. We have science. We have technology. We have the ability to see clearly what we're doing and model what might happen. We have the possibility of consciousness. That's the gift and the curse of living in this moment. We can see the pattern. We can understand what we are. We can choose. Not easily. Not without sacrifice. Not without difficulty and disagreement and struggle. But we can choose. We can choose to be conscious terraformers instead of unconscious ones. We can choose to manage wisely instead of exploiting blindly. We can choose deep time thinking over short-term gain. We can choose to be good ancestors. That's what it comes down to, really. Not saving the planet. Earth will be fine in the long run. Life will adapt, evolve, continue. The planet has survived worse than us. The question is what we pass forward to our descendants. What world do we leave them? What knowledge? What story? Do we leave them a stable climate and a living planet managed wisely? Or do we leave them chaos and collapse and the hard work of rebuilding? Do we leave them the understanding that they are terraformers, with all the power and responsibility that implies? Or do we leave them to figure it out themselves, to rediscover the hard way what we learned? Do we leave them a story that makes sense of what we are? Or do we leave them confused, guilty, ashamed of their own nature? These are choices, not easy ones, not simple, but choices. And we're making them right now, in every decision about energy and land use and climate policy. In every conversation about what we are and what we're building. In every story we tell about humans and Earth and our relationship with this planet we're reshaping. The fires are burning. They've always been burning. We lit them long ago in Africa on the edge of an ice age. And they've never gone out. Now we get to decide what we're forging in those flames. A conscious, wise, future-thinking species that terraforms with care. Or clever apes with matches, burning blindly, refusing to see what we're doing until it's too late. The smoke is rising. The world is changing. The story is being written in carbon and heat and the choices we make today. What kind of ancestors will we be? Tell me, where are you listening from? What's changing in your part of the world? What fires are burning there? And what will you do with the knowledge that you are a terraformer, that your ancestors have been reshaping Earth for 100,000 years, that this is what humans do? The pattern repeats. But consciousness can break patterns. Understanding can change destiny. The fires are burning. What are we building?